This Saturday night, Indigenous artifacts returned. The Catholic Church repatriates dozens of priceless Indigenous items to Canada. But why it's only a sample of what communities are asking for.
Thousands remain in the Vatican collection.
Taking a bite out of food tariffs, a rare reversal from the Trump administration as grocery prices climb. Christmas and Canada Post, what the ongoing labor dispute could mean for your holiday mail. Plus, leveling the playing field. The government announces new funding and support for women's sport.
Global National. Reporting tonight, Jeff Semple.
Good evening and thank you for joining us. We begin with a historic step towards reconciliation. The Vatican has formally agreed to return 62 Indigenous cultural items to Canada. Those artifacts have been held in the Vatican's museums and vaults for the past century. The collection is now set to be delivered to Canada next month and will then be returned to First Nations, Inuit and Métis communities. The move delivers on a promise first made to Indigenous communities by Pope Francis in 2022. But while dozens of artifacts are being repatriated, thousands more remain in Vatican City. Mackenzie Gray has the details and reaction in tonight's top story. Mac.
Jeff, it's said to be one of the most consequential returns of Indigenous artifacts in Canadian history. One of the most important, this rare sealskin kayak, an artifact Inuit communities for years have wanted taken out of Vatican storage and returned home. After meeting with Canadian bishops, the Vatican made it official. His Holiness Pope Leo XIV desires that this gift represent a concrete sign of dialogue, respect, and fraternity. But calling these gifts is controversial. Many believe items were stolen at the request of the then Pope so they could be displayed at a Vatican conference in 1925 on Indigenous people.
Pope Leo needs to acknowledge the harm that this has caused, and he needs to correct the papal narrative that everything was a gift.
Although some disagree with that assessment, including the president of the Manitoba Métis Federation.
If gifts were exchanged, we expect those gifts to be honored and respected. We don't expect them to be returned. Unless they don't want them, then we'll of course take them back.
The full list of what's being returned isn't clear, and when it comes back to Canada, it's not being returned directly to its original owners. The Vatican has transferred ownership to the Canadian Conference of Catholic Bishops. They declined an interview with Global News, but said in a statement this is intended to help bishops in Canada take further steps in the Church's reconciliation efforts with Indigenous peoples. The bishops added that they plan to transfer ownership to Indigenous groups as quickly as possible, but figuring out who is the rightful owner will be a challenge.
How are they going to prescribe to where they go? If you look at the First Nations, there's over 600 bands in Canada. Who's going to lay claim to the artifacts?
Well, this is a start. It's a drop in an ocean relative to the vast Vatican collection of Canadian Indigenous peoples' cultural artifacts, including drawings made by children that were in residential schools.
Thousands remain in the Vatican collection, including there's a large photographic archive of Indigenous peoples, and those photographs should be returned to the communities.
The effort to get these items returned started over 2 years ago under Justin Trudeau, who spoke directly with Pope Francis about it, Jeff. The items will be back in Canada on December 6th, when they'll head to the Museum of History to determine their origins.
Mackenzie Gray in Ottawa. Thanks, Mac. Two of Canada's wealthiest families are teaming up to save another piece of Canadian history. The Thompson and Weston families have together placed an $18 million bid for the Hudson's Bay Royal Charter. That 355-year-old parchment is the foundational legal document that formed the Hudson's Bay Company and granted it extraordinary authority over a vast swath of territory. If their bid is successful, the families say the Royal Charter will be donated and shared among 4 public institutions, including the Archives of Manitoba and the Canadian Museum of History. Turning to the U.S. now, where Americans can expect some relief at the grocery store. President Donald Trump announced he's removing tariffs on hundreds of food products as inflation continues to climb ahead of American Thanksgiving. Trump insists his sweeping tariffs are benefiting the U.S. economy. But as Candice Cole reports, this sharp reversal comes after a string of recent election victories for Democrats that were fueled by concerns over affordability.
I just want to bring down some of the foods.
President Trump Friday aboard Air Force One, laying out plans to roll back tariffs that he set back in April on over 200 food items, including key staples like beef, bananas, coffee, and communion wafers.
This is primarily, food and agriculture products that we simply don't make in the United States.
The move comes amid mounting pressure on the Trump administration to do more to drive down prices as everyday Americans grapple with grocery bills that continue to reach record highs. According to data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, all food cost is up about 18% compared to 2022.
So what we're going to do is we cut back. You'll see prices come down even lower.
Just last week, Trump launched an investigation into foreign-owned meat packers, accusing them of inflating beef prices. According to the White House, some of the tariff rollbacks will apply to tariffs placed on foods from Ecuador, Guatemala, El Salvador, and Argentina, a major exporter of beef to the U.S. Despite the rise in consumer costs, Trump maintains his tariffs have not caused inflation and has promised to dole out dividend checks to American taxpayers.
When I pay people $2,000 each for low and moderate income and middle income people, everybody but the rich will get this. That's not made up, that's real money. That comes from other countries.
Well, it's something that will require legislation. But if you look at how much tariff revenue has been coming in, then there would actually be enough room to cover those checks and not go into the rest of the budget.
The tariff rollbacks took effect retroactively Thursday. They, however, do not apply to any Canadian goods. Jeff?
Candice Cole in Washington. Thanks, Candice. Canadians say they plan to spend less this holiday season due to growing affordability concerns. According to a new survey from the Bank of Montreal, 61% of Canadians say they've changed their shopping plans due to the U.S. trade war, with 41% saying they plan to spend less this year. A quarter of respondents say they also started shopping earlier to avoid rising prices tied to those tariffs. And those planning to ship their gifts across the country may also want to get a head start with the looming possibility of more disruptions at Canada Post. Talks between the Crown Corporation and postal workers remain stalled. Rotating strikes are already underway, and there's no guarantee that last year's nationwide shutdown won't happen again. Ann Gaviola reports on what it all means for your mail this holiday season.
Letters to Santa, greeting cards, presents, caught in the crossfire during last year's 5-week postal workers strike.
I know I won't be really using Canada Post as much.
The federal government stepped in and forced employees back to work right before the holidays without a contract. And people across the country scrambled to make other arrangements.
The Canadian Federation of Independent Business says the prospect of another national disruption this year doesn't sit well with members.
I gotta wonder, the union behind Canada Post, CUPW, it has some sort of death wish. They're alienating some of the last groups of reliable and profitable customers for Canada Post.
After working for months without a deal, in September, the 55,000 postal workers represented by CUPW turned down the government's offer of a 13% pay raise after previously asking for 19%. They remain without a contract and have launched weeks of rotating strikes.
Unfortunately, I'm on CPP disability because I've had some bad accidents. And I don't have email, so I have to rely on mail.
CUPW tells Global News it wants to put labor uncertainty behind us, which is why it's trying to achieve ratifiable negotiated settlements at the bargaining table. But it offers no assurance, just like the Crown Corporation, when pressed about the possibility of repeating last year's disruption. Canada Post tells Global News shutting down and restarting parts of our integrated national network with rotating strikes has always challenged our ability to provide reliable service to customers. As a result, all service guarantees are suspended, including on-time delivery guarantees for parcel services. Canada Post recently submitted its plan to modernize its business model to the federal government to make postal service financially sustainable. Proposed changes include ending daily mail delivery and expanding community mailboxes. Canada Post says it's waiting for the government's sign-off before releasing details.
Canada Post is on track to lose $1.5 billion in 2025. The Crown Corporation hasn't turned a profit in 8 years, and both sides agree big changes need to be delivered. Jeff?
Ann Gaviola in Toronto. Thanks, Ann. And to an update on another looming labor dispute in Montreal. Transit riders are breathing a sigh of relief after a major public transit strike planned for this weekend was called off. The city's public transit agency, STM, reached a last-minute tentative deal with its drivers' union. Details of that agreement have not been released, but the union had been demanding better working conditions. The transit agency says both sides made compromises to avoid any major disruptions. The Canadian Food Inspection Agency is warning not to consume a popular baby formula. The affected products include By Heart Whole Nutrition Infant Formula in the 680-gram and 238-gram sizes sold online. Officials say the products are unsafe due to potential contamination of botulism, a rare and potentially deadly illness. While no cases have been reported here in Canada, more than 20 infant hospitalizations in the U.S. have been linked to those products. The city of Burnaby, BC, issued a long-awaited apology to the Chinese community today as the city officially repealed several bylaws that discriminated against them.
Today, we denounce the actions of the past that discriminated against the people of Chinese descent. We denounce the racist ideology that treated some categories of people as superior to others.
The repealed bylaws date back to the late 19th century and included measures that prohibited people of Asian descent from working in certain businesses, along with farming restrictions. Two other BC cities, Vancouver and New Westminster, previously issued similar apologies. BC's wood pellet industry under scrutiny. Coming up, why Canada is in the crosshairs at the COP30 Global Climate Summit. Thousands of Indigenous people and climate activists marched through the streets of Brazil, demanding the environment be given priority over corporate profits. Their protest aimed at the global COP30 Climate Summit, which has now reached its halfway point. And one of the focal points of that climate summit this week was a dispute over timber in BC. An environmental group claims old-growth trees from BC are being burnt to generate electricity for the UK. The company involved denies that allegation and says it's only using wood waste. Paul Johnson reports.
A protest by Indigenous Brazilians from the Amazon rainforest outside the COP30 Climate Summit Friday. Inside, the official program included a panel about another forest of concern, this one in British Columbia.
Canada is the third largest exporter of wood pellets globally, and BC is Canada's largest exporter.
That's Vancouver-based forest campaigner Tegan Hansen of Stand.Earth, telling COP attendees about their investigation into Drax, the biggest player in BC's wood pellet industry.
Drax also now has a near monopoly on wood pellet production in British Columbia.
Drax is a UK-based utility that makes power by burning wood pellets, much of them from BC. The industry touts its green credentials by saying their model uses waste wood that would otherwise be burned or left to rot. But in a recent study, Hansen and her colleagues say they traveled up to some of Drax's yards in northern BC to track down where their wood was coming from.
At least 90 of those trucks absolutely contained old growth.
Stan's investigation involved comparing clues they found in the field with government and satellite data. They say they found whole trees that were headed for Drax's pellet mills that would be hard to define as waste wood.
And we also visited one of Drax's wood pellet plant yards where I actually counted the rings on trees and counted several trees that were, well over 250 years old.
We reached out to Drax for their side of the story but didn't get a response. The Forests Ministry told us they're reviewing the report and share the desire to protect old-growth forests in BC. A place that this week landed in the spotlight at the world's premier environmental summit.
When it comes to, a 250-year-old tree that's perfectly healthy standing in a forest, there's no realm of reason where you would look at that tree and call it waste.
Paul Johnson, Global News.
Millions of people across Southern California are facing flood alerts and evacuation warnings as an atmospheric river slams into the state this weekend. The relentless rain has drenched Los Angeles. The city has seen more rainfall since Friday than it usually does during the entire month of November. Flash flood warnings are also in effect for areas that were hit hard by California's wildfire disaster earlier this year. That made the terrain more vulnerable to mudslides. Rescue efforts are also underway in the UK after Storm Claudia caused severe flooding. Take a look at the extent of the flooding in Wales. That same storm system also killed 3 people in Portugal, where authorities confirmed a tornado touched down. Hostage diplomacy. Coming up, a warning about Canada's relationship reset with Beijing. My conversation with Michael Kovrig next. Canada's spy chief warned this week that China remains a significant national security threat to Canada. It comes as Prime Minister Mark Carney looks to boost trade with Beijing. And among those urging caution, former Canadian diplomat Michael Kovrig. 4 years after his release from Chinese detention, Kovrig is keeping a cautious eye on China's charm offensive. I sat down with him to ask for his take on Canada's efforts to renew relations with Beijing.
Michael Kovrig, nice to see you. How are you doing?
Very well, Jeff. Thank you. It's good to see you. Interesting times.
Interesting times. So let's talk about that. I think for years, Canadians got used to, when it came to relations with China, wolf warrior diplomacy, hostage diplomacy. But the tone of that diplomacy has really changed recently. You've written that China is sweet-talking us. What do you mean by that?
Essentially that it's a change in tone, but not a very significant change in substance. But it does matter. It is, when Prime Minister Carney and President Xi talk about it as a turning point, it is in the sense that it's a signal from Xi Jinping on down that it's okay to talk to the Canadians again. And they've essentially been freezing us out for the last several years. That is an important step in progress, which I agree with. But, and there's a big but, that's all happening in the context of a very difficult geopolitical situation where China and Russia are pursuing objectives that are ultimately hostile and problematic to not just Canada, but to all Western democracies.
If you were advising the Canadian government on that, how should they proceed as they look to, rehabilitate this relationship with Beijing?
Canada is looking for means of driving economic growth, probably through trying to sell more commodities and energy and natural resources to China while managing dependency, not becoming too dependent on China in any one of those sectors or areas. The risk now in negotiations is that Canadian politicians, under pressure to try to alleviate the economic pain from the United States, rush into agreements with China that may deliver some economic benefits for Canadians in the short term, but have problematic implications for Canadian sovereignty, for our ability to make our own choices about our future, our freedoms. They want Canada to be silent on things like its aggressive behavior in the South China Sea, on its coercion and slow strangulation of Taiwan, on its support for Russia's invasion of Ukraine, on its transnational repression and other foreign interference activities, not only in Canada but around the world. It wants to essentially buy our acquiescence and silence on that, and that's a very dangerous exchange.
So does this sort of warmer tone from Beijing signal perhaps an end to things like foreign interference in your estimation?
I mean, that's exactly the problem, right? Sure, it's better to have Chinese diplomats saying nice things and Xi Jinping smiling and shaking hands, but there's no evidence that, and there's no likelihood, I think, that the Chinese Communist Party is going to change its playbook, because the purpose of that playbook is to advance China's influence and power around the world.
Still ahead, the government's multi-million-dollar plan to support women's sport. It was a dramatic and weather-disrupted finale, but the Vancouver Rise eventually came out on top to win the Northern Super League final. Vancouver beat AFC Toronto 2-1, becoming the first team to hoist the Diana B. Matheson Cup. Women's sport here in Canada is growing in popularity. The WNBA and the PWHL are expanding, and the inaugural season of professional women's soccer just wrapped up. As Lexi Benedict reports, the federal government is now announcing plans to invest millions of dollars to support the sport.
It's a historic milestone for women's sport here in Canada.
It's huge. It's amazing. We're glad that it's finally here. It's long past due.
Fans filling BMO Field for the first ever Northern Super League Championship match.
I am a mom of 3 girls, and this is exactly what the sports world needs. NSL is doing it just right.
The NSL only kicked off in April with 6 teams across the country, but in a few months it surpassed every expectation. With over 100 Canadian players signed, talent from 19 countries, and more than 250,000 tickets sold. And while Saturday night closes out the inaugural season, the impact is already visible. Young girls in the stands here at BMO Field and across the country now know that the biggest stage in soccer can belong to them too.
I want to do this, like my future, like I wish, this is my dream.
The federal government backing that hope with new funding aimed at building on the momentum the league has created.
The government of Canada is going to be investing up to $5.45 million to help the Northern Super League grow the game in Canada. So we're very delighted.
Women's sports is on the ascendancy. You know, next week is PWHL puck drop. We've got the Toronto Tempo coming to town, and we're wrapping up our year with the NSL final here. And so to have the support from government will allow us to continue to grow, will give us that injection of capital to help build facilities, improve training grounds, all of the things that not only benefit our league, but benefit the communities in which we play.
The crowning of NSL's first ever champion isn't just a milestone for the sport, but also for the city. The final is expected to inject more than $12 million into Toronto's economy. A historic night also powered by a new generation of women's sports fans. From AFC Toronto to the Scepters and the Tempo, it's clear to see just how much of an appetite there is for professional women's sports in Canada. Lexi Benedict, Global News.
And that is Global National for this Saturday night. I'm Jeff Semple. This week, we're showcasing pictures of Canadian pride from all over the world, including Olguin, Cuba, Doha,